If you've not seen a Read.co.uk presentation before, there's three things that you'll need to look out for. One is use of big percentages. The other is the use of top fives. And the other thing we try and do is give you guys as many best practice examples from the weird and wonderful world of recruitment as we know it. So expect to see those three things along the way. The presentation that we have for you today is the amalgamation of two research projects, one which we've been running for 3 years and another that we've been running for a year now. So we thought we'd combine the two and just give you guys an overview in terms of what candidates, active and passive, are expecting from recruiters across the UK. We love getting your feedback at these events, so please do come and visit us at the front stand. But also, by way of incentivising my swelling sense of narcissism, I'd encourage you all to tweet using the hashtag InHouseLive. Drop us an at ReadCoUK, and what we promise to do, to the best, most creative, or weirdest, or most wonderful use of any of our stats, we're going to give away an Echo Dot. So you get to walk away with one of those. So we'll get in touch with the winner as soon as we can do after this presentation. And if bribery doesn't work, who knows what will. So keep that in mind when you share your bits and pieces. So, your target talent. There they are. It's that simple. See you later. Kidding. So I guess the point we wanted to use to get across on this slide is that if you consider where we're at in terms of record low unemployment, that is a good thing for the economy. However, there's real challenges in terms of the fight for talent. So what we wanted to do is arm you guys with as many insights that are valuable that you can take back to the workplace as possible. So, without further ado, I wanted to take you through the research a little bit more. So we're very fortunate to have around 40 million job seekers visit Read.co.uk every single month. So we're able to get in front of these guys at relatively short notice and build out as many of these insights as possible. So for the purpose of this research, we were able to get in front of 3,000 active job seekers, and we wanted to take you through 5 key areas: the search for work, employer brand, the recruitment process, happiness at work, and finally a little piece on the dream employer. What's really important about the 3,000 people that you see there is that we were keen to make sure we were representative of as many demographics as possible. So 1,000 of those responses come exclusively from 16 to 24-year-olds. And where we feel that's important, we'll be sharing those statistics as we go through. So, where better place to start than the search for work? And it won't surprise any of you to learn that I'm going to tell you that 52% of all of our respondents told us they went to a job board first. Now, I sense some cynicism, and you're right to question us, and I think we have to take that statistic with a little bit of pinch of salt, and we have to appreciate that there is a certain bias in that this is coming from people that are coming off application from Read.co.uk. But what we have seen and what we hear a lot of is the death of job boards, and we just don't feel that's the case. And when we drilled into that response in more detail, the reason why people are still going and visiting job boards, it's having all the original content stored in one place is the key part to this. So I guess that's why it indexes so highly. It won't surprise you next to see that search engine traffic is the next biggest indicator of where people start their search. And what we've seen from the statistics in terms of Google Analytics tells us that natural search is the predominant driver of traffic. So there is a bit of a difference here between what we see in the numbers that are reflected in analytics and what we see in terms of what people are telling us. Just want to make sure, is the microphone cool? Can everyone hear me? Spot on. Company website comes in next, and that's the first time that's jumped up in the 3 years that we've been running this kind of research. So again, I appreciate that we'll all have our own company websites, but I guess it just kind of heightens its importance and to make sure that your careers section on your site is visible. Professional networks come in at 7, and we'll talk a little bit more about social later on. And finally, recruitment consultancy always indexes well among senior, higher skilled candidates. What's really interesting here is that Job Centre Plus has not featured in the top 5, and that's the first time in the 3 years that we've been running this research that that's been the case. So again, it won't surprise any of us to learn there's the shift that's been away from analogue forms of starting your search work, and it's mainly digital now. But again, there's nothing groundbreaking about that, but just an interesting point to note from the 3 years that we've been running this research. We wanted to take it a little bit of a step back from that in terms of the start for the search work. So thinking about that 16 to 24-year-old demographic, we wanted to ask them which peer groups are most likely to influence your career choices. And for those of you in the room that are parents, you'll be pleased to know that you have a huge sway among your 16 to 24-year-olds. 45% overwhelmingly were the biggest influencers. So you have parents, close friends, teachers, peers, and siblings. And as somebody who's a younger brother, I can certainly say that my sister was no impact on my career as much as I love her. So What was really interesting to us is these points here, which is 75% of that audience suggested that they would rather apply for jobs on mobile than their desktop. And again, the rise of mobile use will not surprise any of us that have been in recruitment for a long time. But I guess this just adds to the credence that if your recruitment process isn't optimized for mobile, you're missing out on a significant portion of your audience. What we found really interesting, and it's the first time that it came out from the 3 years that we've been running this research, is that 63% would prefer to apply without a CV. So whether that's the use of social integration or whether that's use of an applicant tracking system, which I know it can be a challenge for many of our recruiters that we speak to at these events, and perhaps it's an application form that sits off-site. But I think what we'd be keen to balance that out with is that there's still an emphasis on making sure that all of the data you collect is succinct and fast and has to be easy to use. If it's a poor process, you might be losing out on those candidates that are going to be important to you. So we're going to go and talk about social, because again, how much column space have we all seen through the years that's been dedicated to social in the recruitment media? What's really interesting to us is that 61% of our respondents said that they do not use social to apply for jobs. Now this has only increased in the 3 years that we've been running this for. So last year it was around 51%, so it's a significant jump. But that doesn't mean to say that social isn't being used. It's important to understand what are job seekers using social for. And I guess when you think about the use of social in the application process, it's not surprising. Many of us will have seen what happened with Cambridge Analytica, and I guess people are being much more closely guarded with how they use their data and how they will use their social to hand over their information to anyone. GDPR, impending as well, is going to have a significant impact on this. This is my favourite moment from this whole conference. Mr. Zuckerberg, a robot that was taught how to drink water, but yeah, hope you enjoyed that. So we've uncovered that job seekers aren't using social to apply for vacancies. What are they doing? Well, they're using it to follow their dream employers. So I guess social gives us a really good opportunity to amplify our employer brand. And that's something that we've been doing, and it gives us an opportunity to share the things, and we'll give you examples of that, that are not necessarily part of the recruitment process, but gives people a chance to build up their best perception of you. People use it to improve their own employer profile, so make themselves more employable to you guys as recruiters. And finally, and much further down, kind of 50% away from those top two figures, we see applying for vacancies fall down that top, from the top spot right down to 3, and that's within 1 year of us running this 3 years consecutively. So it's quite interesting. So whilst they won't use social to apply for jobs, 63% of our respondents told us that they will select based on your social presence. And again, when we drilled into that, what we understood from that is that they would like to see regular content and ensuring that content is diverse. And if you're stuck on ideas as to what you might want to share using social, again, we'll show you examples of what other companies do. So the next section we have to talk about is employer brand. It won't shock any of you to learn that 67% of our audience respondents are more likely to apply when they recognise your brand. But what's really interesting is that 30% simply don't care if you're a recognisable brand or not. And in that 30%, it's the more senior, more highly skilled candidates. So if you're new to the jobs market, if it's your first time searching for a role, of course recognition is going to play a part. But if your brand maybe isn't as well known as others, then you shouldn't fear about losing out on top talent. At least that's not what our research suggests. What was really important to us is to understand what the candidate view of employer brand is, because again, at events like these, and there are many experts in the room that will be able to take you through EVP in much better detail than perhaps I can, certainly within this next 20 minutes. But what we wanted to do is give you guys a picture of what candidates feel is important in an employer brand. And here's that top 5 I was talking about. So the key thing that they want to get from your employer brand is to ensure that they are completely comfortable with what your organisational values are. Followed up by ethical principles, employee rewards and benefits. An established reputation is always going to help, but isn't as pivotal as those top 3. And finally, a commitment to career progression. But that top piece that you see there is still quite airy. How do you better define that? So again, we used our survey to really drill into much more detail around what are organisational values to job seekers. And they came up with the top 3. The first of which was a track record for training and upskilling. So the example that you can see running in the background here, a company called HomeServe. So just by show of hands, has anyone here heard of HomeServe? Fantastic. They came onto our radar because they appear in many of the top 10, top 100 best people to work for lists. And when you drill into a little bit more detail, it's not hard to see why. On their employee website, which is very clear, very succinct, Ranked number 2 on their reasons to work for us is their commitment to training and development, and that's key. And what they've also used is really good examples of their own people and how they've been upskilled at their time at HomeServe. And it's not just the jobs that you expect from HomeServe in terms of technician and engineers and customer service individuals, but it's people from a range of sectors. So whether it's people working in people teams, HR departments, whether it be digital marketers, or whether it be developers, they've got a bank of testimonials from their own people, which is relatively low cost to do, if you consider we're just incentivizing our own people within the organization to share their stories of their training and development within your organization. So we feel that that's a really that's some low-hanging fruit for us all to take advantage of, is making the best use of your own people and any instances where you've seen training development used to further people's careers. The second point that came up in terms of defining organizational values was always delivering great customer service. So in the background, you can see an example from an American retail brand called Zappos, who are very well known, and they have a lot of PR. They get a lot of PR traction from their weird and quirky instances where they go above and beyond for all of their customers. So in the background video, this gentleman is called Steve, and he was on a customer service call for 10 hours. 10 whole hours, and it was a record for Zappos. And it's great because it incentivizes customers to use you, but we can't underestimate the impact it has in terms of putting over your employer brand, and especially for that 16 to 24-year-old demographic, which is a lot more challenging now than it ever has been before. If you're a brand that's known for good customer service and can share those stories and show that you care about your customers, people are more inclined to work for you. So it's really important. Appreciate we might not all be able to run 10 hours customer service calls, but where we've had examples of really good customer service that you're proud of, let's make sure that we're using our social to share those. And finally, and it's an example that we've used before, helping in the local community. And Deloitte do a really good job of this. And the reason we call out Deloitte's example is because they incentivize their local branches and they empower their local branches to reach out within their local communities to causes that matter to them. And I guess if there's a takeaway from this, it's how do you use your people and what they might be doing already, and how do you empower them to reach out and do good in the local community? Because clearly for job seekers, this is really important. And I think for us, it was quite a surprise to see this represented so highly when it comes to defining your organizational values. So just a quick point, and again, there are many more experts here than perhaps myself, but we did want to find out, when it comes to this information, where are job seekers most likely to look? Well, they're most likely to look on your company website, of course, your careers page, but they'll also be expecting some kind of acknowledgement of it in your job ads, whether it be by job boards or where have you, which is a really big challenge for us as recruiters, because the research that we sit on tells us that the optimum job ad length is around 500 words. There's a lot to cram into those 500 words. That's the tipping point for making sure that you get applications and give people a thorough understanding of your business without being overly long and kind of creating a disengaged candidate too. So there's a whole lot to get in there, and it might not have to be everything in great detail, but if you're able to signal your organisational values, it will be important even as early as your job ads. So the next section we have to cover is your recruitment process. And the first thing we want to get into, rather than define what the candidates expect from the recruitment process, is understand the barriers to entry. And here's another top 5. So the first thing is negative company reviews. And I think all of us would have woken up to the news this morning that Glassdoor was sold to a Japanese firm for 1.2 billion. So if you ever wanted an understanding of the value of review and company review websites, I think that speaks volumes. And it's really interesting to see how that's grown over the years. And I guess it speaks to how the candidates view the kind of customer experience much more aligned with how they'd expect an e-commerce journey to be. It's the same process as the buying process. Before you buy something on Amazon, you're likely to look at the reviews and see what other customers are saying. Candidates are doing this too. So it's really important that we get visibility on that and fight any fires that may be out there. Confusing job descriptions comes in at number 2. And again, I'll just reiterate that point that around 500 words is what's expected from a job description, particularly on job ads that we see on read.co.uk. A lack of clarity on salary, and this is always a big challenge, right? Because in some instances, we're just simply not allowed to share the advertised salary. But what we can say, and again, taking on data that we see from read.co.uk, candidates are 3 times more likely to apply when a salary is advertised. So even if it includes on-target earnings, and even if it's an indication, you're more likely to up your application rate if you are able to share that information. So I appreciate there might be caution with some hiring managers, but there is a case to be made that where possible, it will absolutely have an impact on your applications. A disorganised interview process comes in at number 4, which is an interesting one. And finally, if candidates feel there are a lack of benefits, so the perks around the job and the day-to-day, they might feel that has a negative impact on applying to your brand. 64% of our respondents told us that they receive confirmation of their application most of the time. And that's significant because in the 3 years that we've been running this, that's only increased, which suggests that as recruiters, we're doing a much better job of getting in touch with our candidates and perhaps using those kind of CRM and automated tools that are at our service just to be able to provide a better customer service in terms of recruitment to our candidates. And I think, for me, one of the most pleasing statistics to see from this is just 1.59% told us that they had never received confirmation, and that's down from the 11% that we ran last year. So again, I think that's a huge leap in terms of what we're doing as recruiters to get in touch with our candidates and just take as much care of them as we possibly can do. I think what's really interesting is that 85%, and again, that's only increased year on year, still expect to be informed even if they've been unsuccessful. So again, if you're able to take advantage of CRM and the automated tools that are at our disposal, even if you're delivering what might be a disappointing message, there's real value in terms of having that contact from candidates directly from recruiters, even if they've been unsuccessful. When it comes to not receiving any contact, again, these numbers have remained pretty much static year on year. But within 5 days, you're likely to lose a fifth of those that have applied, and after 2 weeks, people will just assume they've been unsuccessful. So again, I think it speaks to the timeliness of being able to respond to these queries, and again, trying to make best use of the automated services that we have. So in terms of timeframes that we're looking at, 79% of candidates told us that they expect to be interviewed within a fortnight, which, when we've shared versions of this research before, doesn't seem beyond the realms of possibility. I think the more difficult thing to articulate to all candidates is that to expect to be offered the job within 3 weeks is perhaps a little unrealistic, and I don't think it speaks to the expectation they have of us as recruiters. Perhaps it's just a case of making people aware at the earliest point of contact and at the first point of application how long the journey is likely to take. Because if we're not educating our candidates, the assumption is 3 weeks, and I think for the majority of us in this room, that's just simply not going to be possible considering the hiring managers and the interview process at large. I think there's a piece of research from CIPD which suggests that the process takes, from point of advertising, much more in the realms of 9 to 10 weeks. So it's not to say that candidates are pressuring us as recruiters. I think there's perhaps just more that we can be doing to educate people at the earliest point of application. Going back to that 16 to 24-year-old age demographic, we thought it was really interesting to find out what are their biggest fears when they enter work. So having come through that recruitment process, what are the next big challenges that that younger demographic face? And the top 3 biggest fears that these individuals feel are feeling underqualified or inexperienced, which I think we can all appreciate, particularly if it's your first role out of uni or at an apprenticeship, or if you've gone straight into work. Stress and impact on mental health is really key to this age demographic, and I think there's a lot more awareness now everywhere around the impact of mental health. So it's just something that we appreciated seeing represented here in this research. And finally, it's this idea of not being taken seriously. And for me personally, it's not just the 16 to 24-year-old age demographic, right? That's something that we might all feel on a day-to-day basis. So just an interesting statistic to put in front of you, and something to bear in mind, that just because the recruitment process is finished, it doesn't mitigate the challenges that younger candidates face thereafter. And if you wanted a percentage, we love our big percentages, to highlight the importance of getting the whole recruitment process right, and how important this is, particularly for a younger demographic, 97% of those 16 to 24-year-old respondents said that they link their career very closely with their personal happiness outside of work, which we were really pleased at, because I think if you read and buy into a lot of what you see online with some brief desktop research, there's a really easy perception to build of younger talent that they're disengaged, they're more stuck to their mobiles, that they're disenfranchised, they don't care, they're switched off and not engaged. And I just don't think that's simply the case. I think this really articulates the importance and the impact that searching for the right job, finding the right job can have, not just on your wage and your pay packet, but life outside of work too. We're coming towards the end of the presentation, some of you will be glad to hear, and this is a clip taken from Friday at work. That's not true. So happiness at work, and this is a piece of research that we ran last year that we've replicated here for you today. So this is all taken from January of this year. We wanted to understand, among all active job seekers, what's most important for them, what are the most important factors in feeling happy at work. And I don't think it would surprise any of us to learn that in that top 5, work-life balance is still key. And what's really interesting is that when you shift this to a younger age demographic, that still doesn't change. So I don't think there's work-life balance. I don't think that means necessarily that it's about clocking in and clocking out and just being able to turn off at the end of the day. I think it's a case of people just want to feel that their recruiters are playing an active part in what people want to do outside of work. If you consider that many of us might be becoming parents for the first time, it's a case of what as recruiters are we doing to help support that. If there's a real passion outside of work, perhaps it's something to do with health and fitness, then is there anything that we as recruiters can be doing to have an impact outside of the workplace as much as in? So we really want to get across that this isn't just a case of clocking in and clocking out, it's how can we as recruiters impact our talents' personal lives too. Voicing your opinion and having your say saw a massive jump in this year's results. That previously wasn't even in the top 5. So seeing that jump quite rapidly is really interesting. And what's more significant is that it seems like it's a low-hanging fruit. It's kind of a low-cost way of ensuring that our talent feels valued. So being able to give them that platform to have their say is really important. I'll just round out the top 5 by saying flexible working hours and being able to work from home speaks to flexible working, which again I'm sure all of us will be aware of. And finally, pensions and benefits. Pensions is a really weird one because it sounds old school, and I think a lot of candidates coming into the market now, at least from other desktop research that we ran, suggest that they're not even expecting to own their own homes, let alone be thinking about pensions. So it's still quite interesting to see it represented here, but it has fallen from that number 2 slot down to number 5. So it'd be interesting to revisit this in a year's time and see if this area has fallen any further. Just some really quirky and weird stats for you here in terms of peak perks, the best of office amenities, just because it's a little bit different. People expect free and tea and coffee. They expect a quiet workspace, which some of you may be able to give, some of you may not be able to give, but certainly it's valued if you have it. A gym membership, I suppose I could do it by myself. A chair measured to you. That's so weird. So ergonomic chairs are the future, people. You heard it here first. And free fruit regularly. So these are the smaller little things that can help make a difference in the workplace. I'll leave that with you guys to use how you best see fit. I think for us what was more important is understanding the push and pull factors. So the question that we asked here was, which of these factors is most likely to make you look for work elsewhere? So it's about what's going to incentivize candidates to stay as much as what are they looking for from their new employer. It won't surprise you to learn that more pay is still the most highly ranked. I think that's understandable. What's really interesting is, again, it comes back to this whole point of having your voice heard or feeling recognized. And recognition of how hard you work is at number 2, which is not insignificant when you consider all the other options that are available to people. And finally, and we've heard it echoed in the previous slides, more training and support is ideal for what candidates are looking for and will play a big part in helping retain the talent that you already have, as well as attracting the ones that you need. So we're on to the final section. A little bit of fun, and I use that with big air quotes. We always try and run a what organisation would you most like to work for poll, whether that be with a younger audience or this audience in terms of the breadth of audience that we have. But this time we wanted to find out what it is that makes an employer a dream employer. And again, it won't surprise you to learn that a personal interest in that particular brand, in that particular sector, plays a heavy part into why people select these individuals as or these organisations as their dream employer. An interest in ethical principles, which again, you'll have seen echoed earlier on. A history of advancing careers, so again, that point of career progression is key. Brand image and reputation, and finally, and understandably, job security plays a big part in terms of determining factors of what makes a dream employer. And it might surprise you to learn that 71% of the people that we surveyed would leave their job, even if it meant taking a pay cut, just to work for their dream employer. So it's a case of if you can get it right, there's significant ground to be made. So, which organisation would you most like to work for? Would anyone else like to shout out brands that they feel will be in the top 5? Google? Any more for any more? Which one, sorry? Apps, did you say? Amazon. Amazon, interesting one. Okay, interesting. Sorry about that. It took me ages. My hearing's shot. Any more? Let's take you through the top 5. So number 5, BBC. Interesting one, right? I see a couple of confused faces, and I'd agree with that, but I guess it speaks to having that brand heritage, that reputation, and just being a British institution. Apple, how many of us expect to see Apple in that top 5? Virgin, really interesting. Whenever we polled this previously, Virgin always appeared at number 1. So something's just slipping somewhat, or maybe it's just a case of other brands are gaining ground. Number 2 is NHS. And it's always a big shock, but I think it speaks to them still being a destination brand for a sector and a company that people want to work for. And it links very closely back to giving something back to people and feeling like you're making a difference. And at number 1 is Google. I don't think anyone's surprised with it being Google. So that's the end of our presentation. Hope you enjoyed it. Just got some key takeaways for you, 4 very quick ones. In terms of the search for work, online search and job boards still remain the start point for search for work for the majority of our candidates. The use of social to apply for jobs has fallen, but there are really big opportunities to talk about what else you're doing as a brand, as an employer brand, to reach this target talent. Communicating your organisational values is the most important part about improving your employer brand or building your employer brand and communicating it with candidates. Think of every part of your application journey in terms of customer service. So are there points where we can use automation to better inform our candidates of what the expectations of the recruitment process are? And finally, work-life balance is still key to all of our job seekers, and it's the priority for happiness in the workplace. But what we shouldn't forget about is having your say and making sure that people are recognised for the hard work that they do plays a significant part in terms of the ability to attract people, but also the ability to retain them too. And that is all I had. Thank you very much for listening.